What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living on a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sit Down video. Also, make sure you check out the Sit Down now on Instagram. We continue to fire away multiple videos per day about multiple levels of crime and organized crime. Today's show is powered by Profit X. If you are looking as football approaches to get yourself another place to wager on sports, some of the best odds in the business are at Profit X. You can join today by clicking the link in the pinned comment of this video. Also, remember, if you are in a state like California that does not have legalized sports betting, you can use Profit X right now and wager on sports. Like I said, click the link in the pinned comment and jump on board right now. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into another organized crime topic. And one of the people that I see discussed on YouTube a lot is Willie Boy Johnson. Now, question is, why would I do a video on Willie Boy? I've talked about him before. That said, I wanted to go further into why Willie Boy Johnson decided to cooperate against the mafia. And it goes back to the old adage, if you don't take care of your troops, they will rebel against you. Did Willie Boy actually believe that he would never be killed by his old friend John Gotti? I want to delve into the history of Willie Boy and why he did what he did and why in the end he did it. The story of Willie Boy Johnson next on the Sit Down. Willie Boy Johnson was born Wilfred Johnson on September 29th, 1935 in Brooklyn, New York. According to census records, at the time of his birth, his family lived at 1772 Pacific Street in Brooklyn. Now, it was said Willie Boy Johnson's father, John, who was obviously the head of the household, was unemployed. And according to the 1940 census, he was, quote, unable to work. It was also said that John Johnson was a alcoholic and very rarely provided for his family. He and his wife Lillian had 5 total children. They would include obviously Willie Boy, 4 sons, 1 daughter, a daughter Clara, who was the oldest child of John and Lillian Johnson. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Willie Boy's background. Now, we have heard through various reports over the years that Willie Boy is indeed Native American, which I believe is on his father's side. And I know it was on his father's side. What's funny is back in the 30s and the 40s, they were actually listed John and Lillian Johnson as Chinese, which again, I think that was just the sign of the times. Maybe they didn't recognize Native American at that time. From what I do understand, Lillian, Willie Boy's mother, was said to be Italian. And during the 1940 census, there's a brother-in-law that lived in the home with them with the last name Sansone. So we would venture to believe that Willie Boy had some Italian in him. By 1950, the family lived at 2317 Pacific Street, just up the street from their old home. This is obviously the home in modern day times. As I said, Willie Boy's father and his childhood was not particularly easy. His father was said to have a substance abuse problem. He was abusive, didn't provide. And I think this really kind of made Willie Boy into kind of the tough guy that he was. He was running the street quite early. It was said by the age of 12, Willie Boy Johnson was already turning to criminality, robbing and stealing from various businesses in the vicinity that he lived. Now, as I said, Willie Boy was born in 1935. He wouldn't meet John Gotti till approximately the age of 22. In approximately 1957, Willie Boy would meet John Gotti running the streets of Brooklyn. By that point, John was involved in criminality as well, as we know. they would eventually catch the eye of Carmine Charlie Wagons Fatico, and Willie Boy was a known associate in the Fatico crew. Now, according to former NYPD Lieutenant Remo Francisini, who knew Willie Boy quite well, he would state this about Willie Boy and his physical appearance. Quote, he was real stocky, about 5 feet 9 inches and well over 200 pounds. He looked like a professional wrestler. Size 21 neck, gravel voice. You don't want to meet Willie Boy on the street. And if you did meet him, you'd better have backup ammunition in your pocket because 6 bullets were not going to stop this guy. He was the type of guy who, if he got shot, he would almost try to rip the bullets out of his own chest and then get really pissed off. You shot me? Now you're in fucking trouble. Willie Boy was a stone cold tough guy. He would start his mob career essentially as a debt collector. People paid when he came to collect, and he would have no problem hurting you if he had to. Now, in an interesting story, in a very random twist, Queens mobster and eventually Genovese mobster Ciro Perone would state at one point that in the 60s, while in Don Pepe restaurant, which he had an ownership in throughout his life, Willie Boy Johnson would actually stumble into the restaurant at one point after being shot in the head, which, again, didn't kill him. Now, Perone would discuss that they attempted to pull the bullets out of Willie Boy, but, it was very difficult, and they eventually dropped him off at a hospital. Perone would state, again, on wiretap, that if he had known that Willie Boy would eventually become a rat, that Perone would have, killed him himself at that time, which we don't know if he actually would have. But Willie Boy had really been through it all in his early life. I mean, he was a tough SOB. He survived being shot in the head. And the mob knew, particularly the Gambino crime family, that if someone needed, money, or someone needed to have money collected, that Willie Boy was the very trusted person to do it. So by his 30th birthday, essentially, he was on the fast track of being a respected associate of a growing criminal empire. Eventually, not only was he a collector, but he would begin his own bookmaking and loan sharking operations and would actually become a pretty legitimate and good earner for the Fatico crew. He also maintained a legitimate job as a crane operator in the engineering union. However, the problem for Willie Boy is when you are committing crimes, when you're out running the streets, when you are involved with a criminal entity and an organized crime group, you're going to be under the ire of the police. And that's exactly what would happen to Willie Boy Johnson. Before we get into that, though, I want to talk about kind of the dynamic between Willie Boy and John Gotti, because the difference between John and Willie Boy was one in the fact that Willie Boy would never become a made member. He was not fully Italian. John was. And one thing we would find about John Gotti over the years. Now, I'm just going to be quite frank. This has nothing to do with his involvement of the mafia, but he was a horrible friend. I think that's been uncovered time and time again by just the way he treated people that he called friends, right? We've heard that about the likes of Jackie Nose D'Amico, who was constantly being verbally assaulted by John Gotti. John Gotti talked about all sorts of people. He talked about Joe the Cat. He talked about, all these different people behind their backs, right? But some people he talked very badly about to their face. And Willie Boy was one of them. It was said that he would constantly call Willie Boy half-breed and, different things about being an Indian. He was constantly just kind of breaking his balls, which, again, friends do that. But, I think eventually you become a bit kind of irritated. You become a bit maybe disenchanted with certain things. And what happens to Willie Boy is he gets arrested. In 1966, Willie Boy Johnson is arrested on armed robbery. He's eventually sent to prison. And I think on the surface, Willie Boy had every intention of, standing up, being a man. That's what he was. However, the problem is, and the mob sometimes falls apart and doesn't do these sorts of things. The Fatico crew says, we'll take care of your family. Willie Boy believes that they will. They don't. Willie Boy Johnson would eventually state that his wife was actually on welfare. She had no money. So he becomes very irritated. So what does he do? He goes to the FBI and says, okay, you know what? Fuck these people. I'm going to cooperate. Now, what would happen is Willie Boy would eventually become a very, very trusted informant. In fact, he was regarded as CI BQ 558-TE. Now, the TE in the FBI would mean that Willie Boy was regarded as a, quote, top echelon informant. Now, I also want to state what Willie Boy would tell the FBI as far as files about his relationship with John Gotti Sr. Before I do that, though, I want to talk about the book Underboss by Peter Moss involving Sammy Gravano. That book would state, although on the surface, Willie Boy played the, quote, obedient Tonto to Gotti's Lone Ranger, he seemed to take special pleasure in reporting Gotti to the FBI. Gotti's idea of humor left plenty to be desired, and Johnson seethed with resentment as Gotti delivered divisive asides about Redskins and half-breeds and often treated Willie Boy as a second-class citizen. Now, Willie Boy would state to the government about Gotti, quote, sometimes I love him, sometimes I hate him. You know, he wears these fucking expensive suits now, but he's still a lot of bullshit. He's a fucking mutt. Don't be fooled by that exterior. So again, there are times where, as friends, Gotti and Gotti and Willie Boy are close, but Willie Boy gets very sick of the constant barbs to him, treating him like shit. He would say that Fatico would treat him kind of like a gopher, make him, do low end things. And I think the book, in terms of what they said about Willie Boy, was right. There was a lot of resentment of Willie Boy towards people like John. And I think they kind of pushed Willie Boy a little too far. And as I said, the government regarded Willie Boy as a top echelon guy. And we would learn that throughout his approximately 15 to 17 years as an informant, he was very destructive, not only to John Gotti, but to other crime families as well. Now, in the 1974 arrest of John Gotti involving the whacking of James McBratney in Staten Island, the federal government would state that Mr. Johnson, aka Willie Boy, was the sole reason John Gotti was arrested in that case. And that his information, was the detriment. If they didn't have his information, John may have not been arrested. And that Willie Boy quoted saying that he had heard John Gotti boasting about it, that he had been a part of it. So John Gotti went away for several years due solely to Willie Boy Johnson, and nobody knew it. Willie Boy would also provide various very big gems about not only Gotti, but other mobsters who were moving drugs. He would also give information about the whereabouts of Paul Vario's junkyard, to where Vario would have conduct conversations and do business. And down the road, Vario was arrested. He would also discuss very important information about the Pleasant Avenue crew and their exploits in the junk business up in East Harlem. Now, while doing all this providing of information, it was obviously secret. He was a CI. Willie Boy was engaging in committing business for the family. In approximately 1979, Willie Boy Johnson is given a hit on a person called Anthony Tony Plate Pilate. Now, Pilate was a killer in his own right and a very feared individual. He moves his business to Miami. He's a important conduit in Miami for the Gambino crime family. Eventually, though, Neil Della Croce wants him dead because Neil believes some certain things about him. He has to take care of a hit for Neil. Neil wants to distance himself from Tony Plate, so he gives the Gotti group the hit. Now, this is also said to be one of the only hits we know that John Gotti may have actually been the trigger man in. From what we understand, Gotti, Ruggiero, and Willie Boy were involved in taking out Tony Plate. And that would happen again in Miami. It was also said that Willie Boy was one of the 8 people involved in the eventual 1980 kidnapping of John Favara. John Favara, obviously the man who sadly, by accident, killed John Gotti's youngest son, Frank Gotti, in 1980. It was said that Willie Boy was in a crash car and was involved in getting rid of what we would be perceived as a whacked Favara. So Willie Boy's doing it all. He's earning, he's cooperating, giving information. He's also killing people and living 2 lives. In his mob life, he is a dependable killer who makes money for the family. And in the FBI's eyes, he is an extremely important, divisive cooperator. So he's doing it all. The Willie Boy eventually, though, would be arrested. And according to the FBI and the NYPD, he was selling narcotics. He was seen handing a bag to an individual who handed him a bag back. He would claim, Willie Boy, that the money was from gambling. And he decides not only to, take it on the chin, but he tells the NYPD at that time he'll also give them information. So he's given information to the NYPD, the FBI, and he also starts to not only give information on people, but where bodies are, where gambling locations are, which would lead to the arrests of people like Frankie DeChico. He was also giving layouts of the new home of Angie Ruggiero, who is obviously involved in selling junk with John Gotti. He provides the FBI information on, what room is which, where they can install this, where they can install that. And again, this would lead to the arrest of Mr. Ruggiero, which can be seen here. So this is all really, really bad for the mob. And this guy is probably at the time one of the most important cooperators they have. Now, Mr. Johnson makes it abundantly clear, though, I will never testify. This is strictly a secret thing. And he didn't really earn that much money. He was earning, he had earned maybe a few $1,000s over the course of this. But, it's not like Willie Boy was becoming a rich man over his cooperation. By 1984, though, the federal government is starting to, really set John Gotti into their crosshairs. They want him. They want Angie Ruggiero. They want all these different people. And that's where, a very publicized story, Diane Jackalone, she's the assistant U.S. attorney at the time. They're looking to obviously get everybody indicted. The problem is Jackalone realizes that some of the information involved in is Willie Boy and that she plans to out him as a cooperator. Now, one thing that I'll be honest, I'd never heard before. John Gleeson recently stated, and I had interviewed John. I was the first person to interview John Gleeson years ago. I had heard in a recent discussion, a lot of people have gotten on Jackalone over the years for basically outing Willie Boy as a cooperator. Why would she do that? And again, on the surface, it looks really questionable if you're the FBI. You basically put him into the crosshairs and in harm's way. He gives you all this information, and this is the thanks he gets. According to John Gleeson, he would state that the reason Jackalone was so upfront about putting him out there was not only was some of his information very important to their indictment, but Willie Boy was making a mockery of his cooperation. He was out there killing people. He was involved in the murder of Tony Plate in 1979. He was a criminal. He was a killer. He needed to be taken off the street. And, we needed to put it all out there about what he was up to. He didn't deserve anything more than that. Jackalone, nonetheless, not only wants to do it, but she is supported by her superior, Eastern District Attorney Raymond Deary. So everybody's on board with her outing Willie Boy. Now, Willie Boy knew that he was a dead man. He would tell his superior, so his, FBI guy, a guy called Andrew Abbott, that he was a dead man and that if you guys put this out there, I'm a dead man. Nonetheless, in March of 1985, Willie Boy's name appears alongside people like John Gotti, Gene Gotti, Neil Della Croce, the Carniglias, Lenny Di Maria, Nicky Carrazzo, all the people arrested, Ro Trampino, they're all listed as co-conspirators. Now, again, still nobody knows that Willie Boy is the rat. The last person to be arraigned that day, and here we can...
Morning, Mr. Johnson. You ready for trial?
There you could see Willie Boy being led into everything. Willie Boy is the last to be arraigned that day. Now, Jack alone would state that no condition of bail would secure Mr. Johnson's appearance. Now, the judge in the case would state, why is that? At that point, Jack alone would say, quote, he's been an informant over the last 15 years. Willie Boy would jump up and state, quote, not true, Your Honor. And that's where the water starts flowing through. And it's now known that Willie Boy is a cooperator. And not only is a cooperator, but he has been a secret informant for over a decade and a half. Not good. Not good. They would basically put Willie Boy in 23-hour confinement. He's basically in protective custody because if anybody gets a hold of him, that's that. Willie Boy would state he's not testifying, da-da-da-da-da. And eventually, according to Sammy Gravano, everything kind of passes. Willie Boy distances himself from the government, blah, 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 blah. Now, according to Sammy Gravano, Gotti is eventually housed with Willie Boy and himself. Sammy would state, quote, it was up on the 9th floor. John told Willie Boy, you did a bad thing for all them years, but I'll forgive you. It's not the first time it happened. You can never be with us again after this, but nothing will happen to you. Now, Willie Boy would then ask John, according to Gravano, to swear on his dead son's head in terms of Frank Gotti, to which Gravano claims John did. Willie Boy obviously never testified. John beat the rap. Everybody's acquitted. Blah, 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 blah. Now, Sammy would then state, quote, John totally conned Willie Boy. I don't know how he fell for this, but he did. Lock, stock, barrel. So John Gotti gives Willie Boy his word. You don't testify, we're good in our eyes. Nothing's going to happen to you. You can't be around this anymore, but you can live. Your family will be fine. Everybody will be good. Willie Boy buys it. He even buys it to the point of after everything's figured out. Willie Boy eventually, while being housed, has no money. He gets hit on a drug charge, tries to sell narcotics, has to deal with that. Eventually, everything ends. John Gleeson would state that he saw Willie Boy outside court and tells him, what the hell are you doing? You got to get out of here. You're going to be killed. To which Willie Boy basically says, well, no, I'm not going to be killed. Everything's going to be fine. I redeemed myself. John loves me. I'm good. They told me they're not going to do nothing to me. Now, I definitely believe that Willie Boy actually believed John Gotti. They had been friends for decades, right? He sweared on his kid. How could he do that? And again, I think Willie Boy was very innocent in terms of the way he thought. It was kind of, gullible. This is the mafia in the end. And John did what he had to do to get him not to testify. And he knew the friendship meant nothing to him anyway. Doesn't mean nothing to me either. I got to do what I got to do. Now, Gleeson would tell him, get out of town. He would state, I had a construction job. Everything's going to be fine. I'm just living my life. And he would live his life. In approximately late August 1988, August 29th of 1988, Willie Boy Johnson, early in the morning, leaves his home, 7233 Royce Place in the Georgetown section of Brooklyn. He heads down those steps right there to his car, which is a Mercury. Goes to the corner of the street where he's accosted by two shooters who fire 19 rounds at Willie Boy. He's hit multiple times and is killed. The shooters that day were said to be, as we know, Bonanno Crime Family Psycho, Thomas Tommy Patera, as well as a person called Vincent Kojak Guillotino. Both Tommy Karate and Vincent Kojak Guillotino are still alive and have served all this time in federal prison. One of the charges, the hit on Willie Boy. At the time of his death, Willie Boy Johnson was 52 years old. He was eventually buried in a cemetery in Queens. His tombstone would read, "Beloved husband and father, we entrust our precious love unto thee, O Lord." I've always felt that Willie Boy Johnson is a fascinating look into a person who I think truly believed in the code. I think he truly believed in friendship. I think he truly believed in John Gotti. He had been friends with him for years. But I think his resentment, I think John's constant jokes and barbs and treating him like shit just kind of annoyed him, just like it would annoy anybody. And Willie Boy got back at him the only way he knew. It's weird, though, that in the end, it went back to, all right, John, I'll do what you say, John, whatever you want, John. And he actually was kind of mystified into believing what John told him. This is the difference between a true blue gangster and someone who is not a true blue gangster. I'm not going to tell you that Willie Boy wasn't a tough guy or wasn't maybe a gangster for a lot of his life, but John Gotti knew that friendship didn't mean nothing to him, especially after he flipped on him and did all those things. John did what he had to do and had to do it. But it all would have never happened if John would have just been a decent friend to a guy that had been good to him for years. And one of these things was really, I think, in coupling a lot of different things that brought John Gotti down. Do I think Willie Boy was the sole reason John went away? No. But a lot of this coupled together eventually led to John Gotti's demise. Willie Boy Johnson, very interesting individual nonetheless. Like I said, at the time of his death, very violent death, he was 52 years old. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And if you enjoyed it, let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you'd like to support my channel further, hit that super chat thanks icon or the super thanks icon below the video. We'll see you next time here on The Sit Down.